Hey folks, before the video starts, I want to say big thank you for the feedback you gave me in the last video. Again, I will be short and say, as every other video, to leave a like and hit the subscribe button. Also, don't forget to comment down below, helping me to give proof to YouTube that all of you who follow this channel so far are real people who watch my videos. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy. My sister's body was found 10 years ago. A dark web stream claims she's still alive, and she's begging for help. I never thought I'd end up writing one of these. I used to laugh at creepypasta stories, thinking they were just made up internet campfire tales. But something happened to me last week. Something so surreal, I haven't slept since. Every time I close my eyes, I hear her voice, see her face, and feel the same bone-chilling dread that started it all. I'm posting this here because I need to know if anyone else has experienced something like this, or if I'm losing my mind. Let me back up. My name's Jake. I'm 26, live in a small Midwest town, and work a boring IT job that leaves me way too much time to mess around online. But this story isn't about me. It's about my sister, Emily. Emily was my best friend growing up. She was 2 years older, the kind of person who could light up any room just by walking in. We were inseparable, despite the usual sibling spats, until she disappeared when I was 16. She was 18, just starting her freshman year of college, and one day, she was gone, vanished into thin air. For months, my parents and I clung to every sliver of hope, scouring the news, handing out flyers, and praying for a miracle, but that miracle never came. 9 months after Emily disappeared, her body was found in the woods about 40 miles from campus. It was bad. The coroner's report was sealed, but the whispers in town were enough to piece together the truth. She had been brutally murdered. The cops arrested some drifter passing through, claimed he confessed, and that was it. Case closed, at least for them. For me, it was never over. Emily's death left a gaping hole in my life that I've spent a decade trying to fill. Therapy, hobbies, even the occasional dabbling in the weird corners of the internet. I've done it all to try and move on, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened last Friday. It started with an email. I was at my desk, procrastinating on work, scrolling Reddit, when I saw the notification. The subject line was, "You should see this. It's about Emily." No sender. Just that one ominous line. My first instinct was to delete it. I mean, come on. It screamed phishing scam, or some troll trying to mess with me. But curiosity got the better of me. I clicked. The email was blank except for a single link. Now, I know what you're thinking. Jake, why the hell would you click a random link from a shady email? Trust me, I asked myself the same thing later. But in that moment, something about the email, the way it referenced Emily, the sheer randomness of it, felt personal. Like whoever sent it knew me, knew her. So, against every shred of common sense, I clicked. The screen went black for a few seconds, then loaded a site I'd never seen before. It was bare bones, just a white page with a single embedded video. No ads, no comments, no context. The video thumbnail was black with the words "Live Now" flashing in blood red text. At first, I thought it was just a hoax, maybe some ARG or viral marketing stunt. But then I hit play. The stream was grainy, the kind of low-res video you'd expect from a webcam in the early 2000s. The camera was fixed on a dimly lit room, empty except for a metal chair bolted to the floor. There was something splattered on the walls, Dark stains that might have been paint, but looked too organic for comfort. And then I heard it. Her voice. "Hello? Is anyone there? Please, I need help." I froze. My heart felt like it had stopped beating entirely. It was Emily's voice. Not a recording, not some actor trying to mimic her. I'd know that voice anywhere. She sounded hoarse, like she'd been crying or screaming for hours. The camera panned down, revealing someone tied to the chair. Her head was slumped forward, hair covering her face, but I could see enough to recognize her. Same auburn hair, same slender frame, even the faint scar on her wrist from when she broke her arm as a kid. It was Emily. It couldn't be, though. Emily was dead. I'd seen the casket. I'd seen her face, pale and lifeless, at the funeral. But there she was, alive, or something close to it, begging for help on a stream I wasn't supposed to see. "Please," she sobbed, lifting her head to stare into the camera. Her face was gaunt, her cheeks hollow, but her eyes, those piercing green eyes, were unmistakable. "I don't know how much longer they'll keep me here. Please, Jake, you have to find me." She said my name. Not just help me or save me, but Jake. She knew I was watching. Before I could even process what I'd just seen, the screen glitched. The video froze, pixelating into static before cutting off entirely. In its place, a single line of text appeared. 1 week. Find her, or she disappears forever. And then the page went blank. I stared at my monitor, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. Was this real? Some kind of sick joke? If Emily was alive, where had she been all these years? And if this wasn't her, who was behind it? And why? All I knew was that I couldn't ignore it. For the first time in 10 years, I had a lead, however twisted it might be, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. I didn't care what it took. I was going to find her, or die trying. After the video cut off, I sat there staring at my screen like a complete idiot. My hands hovered over the keyboard, shaking so bad I could barely keep them still. My mind felt like it was splitting in two. One part of me wanted to believe this was some elaborate scam, some psycho playing a cruel joke. The other part knew what I saw. That voice, those eyes, that was Emily. But how could it be? I tried refreshing the page, but it didn't work. The site was gone, like it had been wiped from existence. I even checked the browser history, but there was no record of the link. My IT background kicked in, and I started running some diagnostics. Nothing. It was like the email and everything that followed had never existed, except I knew better, and I knew I had to act fast. The countdown in the message, 1 week, was burning in the back of my mind like a brand. If this was real, if there was even a fraction of a chance Emily was alive, I couldn't waste time. Whatever this was, it wasn't something I could handle alone. I needed help. But who the hell do you call when the dead start calling for help? I thought about going to the cops, but let's be real, they'd never believe me. Imagine walking into a precinct and trying to explain that a video on a mystery website showed your sister, who's been legally dead for 10 years, begging you to save her. At best, they'd think I was nuts. At worst, they'd slap me with a false report and send me home. I didn't know where else to turn, so I started doing what I do best, digging. I scoured forums, subreddits, and every tech site I could think of, looking for anything that might explain what I'd just seen. Most of it was useless, just threads about deep web horror stories or urban legends about haunted streams. But after hours of searching, I found something that sent a chill straight down my spine. On an obscure tech blog buried under layers of outdated posts, there was a thread about something called Red Room streams. For those of you who don't know, Red Rooms are supposedly these live torture sites you can find on the dark web. The idea is that sickos pay in cryptocurrency to watch and sometimes even control what happens to the victim. Most people think they're just myths, exaggerated stories to scare newbies away from the dark web. But this thread, it claimed they were real. And it wasn't just claiming they existed, it was explaining how to find them. Now, I dabbled in the dark web before, mostly out of curiosity. I'd poked around some sketchy marketplaces and forums, but nothing serious. This was different. I wasn't just wandering for fun, I was hunting for answers, and the deeper I dug, the more I realized I was in way over my head. I followed the instructions from the thread, setting up a secure browser and VPN, and diving into the underbelly of the internet. My heart was pounding the whole time. Every click felt like I was peeling back a layer of reality I wasn't supposed to see. After hours of navigating through shady links and encrypted forums, I found what I was looking for. A post titled The Forgotten. The description was vague, but it mentioned something about people who were lost between life and death, being kept in hidden places for entertainment. The post included a link, one that required an invite code to access. I felt a pang of frustration until I scrolled to the bottom of the page. Someone had commented, "Need an invite? Message me." Without thinking, I sent a message to the username, a jumble of random letters and numbers. A reply came almost instantly. Send 0.01 Bitcoin. Bitcoin. Of course. I was pissed at myself for not seeing that coming. These people weren't going to hand out access for free. Thankfully, I had some leftover crypto sitting in an old wallet from a few years back. I sent the payment, and less than 10 minutes later, I received the code. I hesitated before using it. My gut was screaming at me to stop, to close the browser, and pretend this never happened. But every time I thought about walking away, I pictured Emily's face, the fear in her voice, the way she said my name. So, against all logic, I entered the code. The site I landed on was wrong. I don't know how else to describe it. The layout was minimal, almost like an old GeoCities page, but there was something deeply unsettling about it. The text was formatted in a way that felt intentionally disorienting, like it was designed to confuse you. And the images, God, the images. There were photos of people in what looked like underground rooms, chained to walls or strapped to chairs. Their faces were blurred, but their bodies, they were emaciated, twisted into shapes that didn't look human. At the top of the page was a banner that read, "Where the lost are found." I kept scrolling, trying not to puke, until I found a section labeled, "Upcoming Streams." My stomach dropped when I saw the thumbnail. It was the same room from the video earlier. The metal chair, the dark stains on the walls, and the title above it, "Help her before it's too late." I clicked, and a countdown timer appeared. 5 days, 17 hours, 43 minutes. I stared at the timer, my heart pounding in my ears. This was it. Whoever, or whatever, was behind this had given me a deadline. But what was I supposed to do with it? I couldn't just sit around waiting for the stream to start. I needed to figure out where Emily was and how to get her out. I went back to the photos, hoping for clues, but everything was intentionally vague. No landmarks, no identifying features, just anonymous victims in anonymous rooms. I was about to give up when I noticed something strange in one of the images, a tiny detail, almost hidden in the corner. It was a symbol, painted on the wall behind one of the victims, a triangle with an eye in the center, surrounded by what looked like flames. I recognized it immediately. It was the same symbol that had been spray painted near the spot where Emily's body was found. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a coincidence. Whoever was behind this, whoever had taken Emily, had been there from the beginning. They'd left their mark like a sick signature, and now they were taunting me with it. I closed the browser and leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. I had 5 days to figure this out. 5 days to find her, or she'd disappear forever, just like the message said. But where do you even start when the trail leads to the darkest corners of the internet? How do you fight something that's been lurking in the shadows for over a decade? I didn't know the answers, but one thing was clear. I was in way deeper than I'd ever imagined, and if I wasn't careful, I might not make it out alive. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily, her gaunt face, the desperation in her voice, the way she said my name, like she knew I was watching. That single image of her chained to that chair was burned into my mind, playing on a loop like a broken tape. The next morning, I knew I couldn't go into work. My head wasn't in it, and honestly, I was afraid to leave my apartment. What if I missed something? What if another message came through, or another video? I called in sick and spent the day glued to my laptop, retracing every step I'd taken the night before. I went back to the dark web, combing through forums and chat rooms, trying to find anyone who knew anything about the site or the symbol I'd seen in that photo. But that world doesn't work like Google. There's no neat index, no FAQ. It's chaos. Layers upon layers of fragmented information, half-truths, and dead ends. After hours of searching, I found a thread on an encrypted message board titled "The Burned Eye." My heart skipped a beat when I opened it and saw the same triangle and eye symbol from the photo. The thread was old, years old, but it was a gold mine of disturbing details. People in the thread claimed the Burned Eye was some kind of underground cult that operated on the dark web. Their thing. Kidnapping people who were forgotten by society. Runaways, drifters, addicts, the mentally ill. According to the posters, the group believed these people existed in some liminal state between life and death, and the Burned Eye had found a way to harness their energy, whatever that meant. One post in particular caught my attention. It was from someone who claimed to have escaped one of their holding sites. The guy didn't go into detail, but he mentioned something that stopped me cold. Their symbol was always painted near their victims as a warning. They wanted you to know it was them. They wanted you to feel powerless. It explained a lot. That mark had haunted me for years, sprayed on a tree near where Emily's body was found. Back then, we'd written it off as some graffiti tag, but now I knew better. The poster also mentioned another detail. Their rituals often involved live streaming the victims, showcasing them to their network. Sometimes it was to taunt the families. Other times, it was just for their own entertainment. That sick knot in my stomach tightened. It all lined up. Emily wasn't just some random person they'd taken. They'd picked her on purpose, and now they were using her to torment me. There was one last line in the post that stood out. If you ever see their mark, it's already too late. They're watching you. By the time the sun set, I felt like I was unraveling. Every sound in my apartment felt amplified. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards, even my own breathing. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was watching me. It got so bad I started double-checking the locks on my doors and windows, paranoid that I'd find someone waiting on the other side. At around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was a text from an unknown number. "You're getting close. Keep digging." I stared at the message, my heart racing. Whoever sent it knew what I was doing. My immediate instinct was to text back, but before I could type a single word, another message came through. "Check your door." I froze, my body locking up like I'd been turned to stone. My apartment was small, just a one-bedroom in a quiet complex, and I hadn't heard anyone knock or come up the stairs. Slowly, I stood up and crept to the peephole. The hallway outside was empty, but then I noticed it, a small envelope wedged under the door. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single Polaroid. It was a photo of me, sitting at my desk, staring at my computer screen. My blood ran cold. This wasn't some zoomed-in shot from outside my window. It was taken from inside my apartment. There was something else in the envelope, a USB drive. At that point, every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to call the cops, but I couldn't. Something told me that involving them would only make things worse. Whoever this was, they weren't just threatening me. They were playing with me, pulling the strings like I was some kind of puppet. I plugged the USB into an old laptop I'd wiped clean and booted up just for this kind of thing. The drive contained a single video file labeled watchme.mp4. My stomach churned as I clicked on it. The video was grainy, just like the stream I'd seen before. It showed the same room, the chair, the stained walls, but this time, Emily wasn't alone. A man stood behind her, wearing a featureless white mask and a black hoodie. He didn't speak, didn't move. He just stood there, looming over her like a shadow. Emily's head was down, her hair covering her face. She wasn't crying or begging this time. She just sat there, completely still, as if she didn't even know the camera was on. Then the man leaned down and whispered something in her ear. I couldn't hear what he said, but Emily flinched like he'd struck her. Slowly, she lifted her head to the camera. Her lips trembled as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jake, please, he's coming for you next." The screen cut to black. I slammed the laptop shut and sat there, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might explode. He was coming for me? Was this some kind of warning? A threat? Or was it just another mind game to mess with me? I didn't have time to figure it out. My phone buzzed again, another text from the same unknown number. TikTok. That was it. 2 words. Simple, yet terrifying. They knew where I lived. They'd been inside my apartment. And now, they were counting down the days, just like I was. I don't know how I managed to fall asleep that night. I kept a knife by my bed, half expecting the masked man to show up in my room at any moment. But the night passed without incident. When I woke up, I felt even more determined. They wanted me scared, but I wasn't going to let them win. If they thought they could push me into giving up, they didn't know who they were messing with. I wasn't going to stop. Not until I found Emily. Not until I brought her home, or made them pay for what they'd done. The next morning, I woke up to my phone vibrating on my nightstand. The screen glowed with a new text, again from the same unknown number. 48 hours. That was it. No explanation, no threats, just a cold reminder that the clock was ticking. Every instinct in my body told me I was running out of time. I didn't even bother to respond. I knew they wouldn't answer. These people weren't playing by any rules I understood. Instead, I threw on some clothes, grabbed my laptop, and got to work. I had 2 days to figure out where Emily was, and I wasn't going to waste another second. The USB drive haunted me. I kept replaying the video in my head. Emily in that chair, the man in the mask, his shadow looming over her like some dark omen. I felt like I'd been shoved into the middle of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. And the worst part? I didn't even know if she was still alive. But giving up wasn't an option. I went back to the message boards, searching for anything connected to the burned eye or the site hosting the stream. It was like swimming through tar, post after post of conspiracy theories, half-baked leads, and cryptic warnings from people who were either too scared to talk or too paranoid to trust. But then I found something that made my heart skip a beat. It was a post titled, "Live Auctions, the Forgotten Ones." The post was short, just a few sentences, but it described something that matched the video I'd seen. According to the user, the burned eye didn't just stream their victims, they sold them. The streams were part of an underground auction where high rollers could bid on the right to decide what happened to the people they'd captured. The user claimed that once a victim was sold, they were never seen again. The buyers, whoever they were, made sure of that. At the bottom of the post was a link. My stomach churned as I clicked on it. The link took me to a login page, just as encrypted and bare bones as the rest of the sites I'd visited. I didn't have an account, but I noticed a tiny, barely visible text box at the bottom of the page. It read, "Enter invitation code." I grabbed the envelope from the night before and typed the code written on the back. The page loaded for a few seconds before a new screen appeared. My breath caught in my throat. It was a live countdown, the same one I'd seen before. Only now, it wasn't just a timer. Below, it was a list of names, or maybe aliases, alongside cryptocurrency balances. I realized I was staring at the bidding war for my sister's life. The auction hadn't started yet, but people were already throwing their money around, stacking their accounts with more crypto than I'd ever seen in my life. There was no chat, no names, no faces, just the cold, sterile numbers ticking upward like a death toll. For hours, I watched the page, my mind racing with questions. Who were these people? How could they spend this kind of money on something so sick? And how the hell was I supposed to beat them? My savings account wasn't even enough to cover next month's rent, let alone compete with anonymous bidders dropping millions in Bitcoin. But then I noticed something strange. There was a section on the page marked Additional Terms. It was buried in the fine print, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. The terms outlined the rules for the auction, explaining how the bidding worked. But one line stood out. Non-monetary offers will be considered at the discretion of the host. I stared at the words, my heart pounding. Non-monetary offers? What the hell did that mean? Were they talking about bartering, favors, information? I didn't know, but I saw an opportunity. If I couldn't outbid these psychos with money, maybe I could offer something else, something they wanted. I went back to the forums, combing through every post I could find about the burned eye. After hours of digging, I stumbled onto something buried in the replies of an old archived thread. A user claimed they'd been approached by someone in the group years ago, asked to procure certain items for their rituals. According to the post, the burned eye was obsessed with objects tied to death, personal items from crime scenes, heirlooms from the deceased, even ashes from cremations. They believed these items held some kind of power, connecting them to their victims. The idea made my skin crawl, but it also gave me an idea. I had something they might want. I still had Emily's necklace. It was a simple silver chain with a tiny locket she'd gotten for her 16th birthday. She wore it every day until the day she disappeared. When the cops returned her belongings after she was found, the necklace was one of the few things that wasn't covered in blood. I'd kept it all these years, tucked away in a drawer, a painful reminder of what I'd lost. Now, it might be my only chance to save her. I didn't waste time. I took a photo of the necklace, uploaded it to the auction site, and added a note. Non-monetary bid, personal item belonging to the victim. Name your price. I hit send and waited, my heart pounding like a jackhammer. Minutes felt like hours. I kept refreshing the page, half expecting my offer to be ignored or rejected. But then, something changed. My bid was accepted. A message appeared on the screen, stark and simple. You have been chosen. Prepare for further instructions. Chosen for what? I didn't know, but the countdown continued, and I knew time was running out. I had no idea what I'd just agreed to, but if it meant getting Emily back, I didn't care. I'd do whatever they wanted. The instructions came an hour later in the form of a text. It was another location, a GPS coordinate this time, deep in the woods outside of town. No explanation, no details, just a time. Midnight. When I arrived, the forest was pitch black. The only sound, the crunch of leaves under my boots. I parked my car on the side of the dirt road and followed the coordinates on foot, every nerve in my body screaming at me to turn back. But I couldn't. Not now. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a clearing. In the center was a small wooden shack, its windows boarded up, its door slightly ajar. A single lantern hung above the entrance, casting flickering shadows across the trees. I stepped inside, and the smell hit me first. Damp wood, rot, and something metallic, like old blood. The room was empty except for a table in the center. On it was a laptop, its screen glowing with a live feed. It was the room, the chair, Emily. Her head was down again, her body limp. For a terrifying moment, I thought she might already be gone. But then she stirred, her shoulders shaking as if she were crying. A voice crackled through the speakers. It was low, distorted, impossible to identify. Welcome, Jake. You've made it this far. Let's see how far you're willing to go. The screen cut to black, replaced by a single line of text. Do you want to save her? I typed, my hands trembling. Yes. The reply came instantly. Prove it. And that's when the lights went out. When the lights cut out, I froze. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, the kind of breathing you only hear in your nightmares. The darkness wasn't just the absence of light. It was suffocating, oppressive, like it had weight. The silence was even worse. No hum of the laptop, no creak of the shack's old wood, nothing but my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Then I heard it. Footsteps. They weren't loud, but they were deliberate, calculated, each step slow and heavy, like whoever or whatever was in the room wanted me to know they were there. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. I was rooted to the spot, my fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly they ached. The footsteps stopped, and a voice, distorted, warped, spoke from somewhere behind me. Do you think she's worth it? I whipped around, but the room was still pitch black. My hands fumbled for my phone, the only source of light I had left. The beam from the flashlight app cut through the dark. but there was nothing there. The room was empty. Do you think she's worth it, Jake? The voice repeated, this time closer. Too close. Yes, I shouted, spinning in circles, the flashlight shaking in my hand. I'll do whatever you want. Just let her go. The voice chuckled, low and guttural. You don't understand. This isn't about her. This is about you. Suddenly, the laptop flickered back to life, casting the room in a sickly glow. The screen showed the same room as before, but now Emily wasn't alone. The masked man stood behind her again, his hand resting on her shoulder like he was claiming her. Emily didn't flinch this time. She just stared into the camera, her green eyes wide and terrified. Time's up, the voice said, now coming from the laptop speakers. Make your choice. On the screen, a countdown appeared. 10, 9, 8. Wait, I screamed, slamming my hands on the table. What do you want? Money, information. Just tell me what to do. The timer didn't stop. 7, 6, 5. The voice crackled again, cold and emotionless. Her life for yours. Step into the chair, Jake. It's the only way. My stomach dropped. The camera panned down, showing the empty chair bolted to the floor in the same room where Emily was being held. Another camera angle clicked on, this one showing the same chair, but it was here, in the shack with me. I turned my flashlight toward the corner and saw it. The metal chair, waiting for me, the straps hanging loosely like eager arms. The timer kept ticking. 4 dots, 3 dots. Do it, Emily screamed, her voice hoarse and desperate. Jake, please, I don't want to die. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. My body moved on autopilot, like I was being pulled toward the chair by some invisible force. I dropped my phone, the flashlight spinning wildly across the room, and stumbled into the chair. My hand shook as I strapped myself in, the cold metal biting into my skin. The moment I was secure, the voice spoke again. Good. The lights in the shack blazed on, blindingly bright. I squinted against the glare, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The laptop screen changed again, now showing Emily slumping forward in her chair as the masked man stepped aside. She was free, her wrists and ankles unbound, but she didn't move. Emily, I croaked. Run, get out of there. She lifted her head slowly, her eyes locking onto mine through the screen. For a moment, I thought I saw relief. Then something changed. Her expression twisted, her lips curling into a smile that wasn't hers. It was too wide, too unnatural, like it had been forced onto her face by something else. Jake, she said, her voice low and sing-song. You shouldn't have done that. The screen cut to static. The shack was silent again, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full, vibrating with something I couldn't see. I tried to move, to unstrap myself, but the chair wouldn't budge. My arms and legs felt like they were weighed down by lead. Panic set in as I struggled against the restraints, the metal biting deeper into my wrists. Then I heard it. The footsteps were back, but this time they weren't coming from behind me. They were coming from outside the shack, slow, deliberate, crunching through the dead leaves like they were counting down the seconds until they reached me. I strained against the straps, my breath coming in short, frantic gasps. What do you want from me? I shouted into the void. You said you'd let her go. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. The handle creaked as it turned, the old wood groaning in protest. My flashlight was still on the floor, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. A figure stepped into the room, their face hidden by the same blank white mask I'd seen in the videos. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They just stared at me, or at least I thought they did. It was impossible to tell where they were looking behind that mask. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "Why are you doing this?" The figure tilted its head, almost like it was amused. Then, without a word, it raised a hand and pointed to the laptop. The screen flickered back to life, showing Emily again. But this time, she wasn't in the chair. She was standing in the room behind the masked man, staring into the camera with that same too wide smile. Her eyes were dark now, empty, like the light in them had been snuffed out. "Jake," she said, her voice distorted, layered with something deeper, something inhuman. "You're one of us now." The figure in the room stepped closer, and I realized too late what was happening. They weren't just pointing at the screen, they were pointing at me. The laptop flickered one last time, before shutting off, leaving the room in complete darkness. But the last image burned into my brain was Emily's face, her smile stretching even wider as she whispered one final word: "Run." I don't remember how I got out of the shack. I don't remember running through the woods, tripping over roots and branches, or collapsing in the dirt next to my car. The next thing I knew, I was home, sitting on my couch, staring at the envelope with the Polaroid and USB drive still clutched in my hands. That was 2 days ago. I haven't heard from the burned eye since, but I can feel them. They're watching, waiting. My phone buzzes at odd hours, with texts that disappear before I can read them. Shadows move in the corners of my vision, just out of reach. And at night, when the world is quiet, I hear footsteps outside my door. I keep telling myself it's over, that Emily is free, but deep down, I know the truth. I didn't save her. I traded places with her, and now she's out there, walking in a world she doesn't belong to anymore. And I'm stuck here, waiting for the burned eye to come collect what they're owed. I was tracking a missing person in Area 51 for a podcast. A dark web group sent me coordinates that match a recently dug grave. Alright, so before I even get into this, let me make something clear. I'm not some private investigator or a wannabe detective. I'm just a guy with a mic and way too much time on my hands. My podcast started as a hobby, a way to tell weird stories I'd find online. Urban legends, conspiracy theories, spooky Reddit threads. You know the drill. People loved it, so I kept going. But this is something else. A few months ago, someone emailed me about a missing person named David E. Krause. The email was weirdly formal, almost like a job listing. It said, "David disappeared near Area 51 on September 3rd. Authorities claim he's just another lost hiker, but there's more to the story. If you want details, reply to this address." So, of course, I replied. This was exactly the kind of content my listeners eat up. Mystery, government cover-ups, and Area 51. It practically writes itself. A day later, I got a zip file. Inside were photos, scanned police reports, and links to private forums discussing David's disappearance. It wasn't just another lost hiker case. The guy was an astrophysicist. According to the files, he worked on some classified project for the military. The last photo of him was taken at a gas station just 10 miles outside Area 51. After that, nothing. The police reports were even stranger. David's car was found abandoned on a dirt road, the key still in the ignition. There was no sign of a struggle, no footprints leading away from the car, just an empty vehicle in the middle of nowhere. The report also mentioned that the FBI had taken over the case after just 3 days. That's when it started to smell fishy. I recorded a quick episode, breaking down the details and asking for listener tips. Honestly, I didn't expect much, but within hours, I started getting emails. Some were from conspiracy theorists ranting about aliens. Others were from people claiming they knew someone who worked at Area 51. You know, the usual nonsense. But then, one email stood out. It was from a guy who called himself Kerosene. Yeah, super edgy, I know. His message was short. You're asking the wrong questions. David isn't missing. He was taken. Follow the trail. Start with this. The lost signal. What the hell did that even mean? I thought about ignoring it, but something about it stuck with me. The lost signal. It sounded like a podcast episode title, right? I did some digging and found out it's a term used in deep web circles. It refers to cases where people vanish after being caught up in something they shouldn't have been poking around in. Usually, it's tied to government secrets or black market deals. To be honest, I didn't really know how to navigate the deep web. I'd read about it, sure, but the idea of going on there freaked me out. I ended up calling a friend who's more tech savvy than me. Let's call him Mike. Mike's the kind of guy who can hack a vending machine for free snacks. Not that he ever has, for legal reasons. Wink. When I told him about Kerosene's email, he laughed and said, "Dude, you're about to be on some watch lists." But he agreed to help. We set up a VPN, used some Tor browser thing, and eventually found a forum dedicated to the lost signal. It was unsettling. The forum looked like it hadn't been updated since 2004. Basic HTML, with a black background and neon green text. The threads were full of people talking about disappearances, weird government experiments, and a lot of stuff about frequencies, like radio waves or something. I didn't really get it. One thread caught my eye. It was titled, "The Krauss Coordinates." The post was simple. For those looking for David E. Krauss, 37.0943 degrees north, 115.7842 degrees west. Proceed with caution. Dig carefully. Mike pulled up Google Maps and entered the coordinates. It pinged somewhere in Nevada. Close to, you guessed it, Area 51. But here's the kicker. The satellite view showed a small patch of disturbed Earth, freshly disturbed. "This feels like a trap," Mike said, and I agreed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was onto something. I decided to record another podcast episode, this time sharing everything I'd learned so far. I didn't give out the coordinates, didn't want to be responsible for some crazy listener wandering into a restricted zone, but I asked if anyone else had heard of Kerosene or the lost signal. That episode blew up. Listeners were flooding my inbox with theories. Some said David stumbled onto alien tech. Others thought he was working on a weapon so dangerous the government had to make him disappear. But one email made my blood run cold. It was from a burner account, no name, no signature. The subject line read, "Stop now." The body of the email was just one sentence. "You're digging your own grave." After I got that email, "You're digging your own grave," I stared at my screen for a solid 5 minutes. My first thought was, all right, someone's trolling me. I mean, when you talk about conspiracy theories and missing people, you're bound to attract a few crazies, right? But this felt different. For starters, the timing was too perfect. I just uploaded the episode about the Krauss coordinates, and within hours, this lands in my inbox. And the tone? It wasn't some wild-eyed rant about UFOs or shadow governments. It was cold. Director, The kind of message that sticks in your head. I showed it to Mike the next day. "Congrats," he said. "You're officially on the radar of someone sketchy. Maybe delete your browser history." "Very funny," I shot back, but I wasn't laughing. Mike, being the kind of guy who thinks he's invincible online, decided to dig deeper into that forum. I told him not to, half jokingly said I didn't want him ending up in a body bag, but he just waved me off. "It's just a forum, dude. Relax." 2 days later, he called me, sounding more serious than I'd ever heard him. "You're not gonna believe this," he said. Mike found a hidden link in the forum thread. It wasn't clickable, just a random string of characters that didn't look like anything, but when he copied and pasted it into his Tor browser, it took him to a page that was, well, different. He described it as an old-school map, like something you'd see in an RPG game, just a black background with white outlines marking various locations. Most of the places were labeled with cryptic names: the Silent Tower, Iron Key, and the Latch. But there was one spot near the bottom of the map that caught his attention: the pit. When he clicked on it, the page loaded a series of blurry photos. They were grainy, like they'd been shot on an old flip phone. The first few didn't show much, just desert landscapes and what looked like the remnants of a chain-link fence. But then came the last photo. It was a close-up of the ground. You could see dirt and rocks, and in the middle of the frame, there was a shovel. Next to the shovel, a freshly dug hole. Mike said he felt sick when he saw it. He swore it wasn't just a random picture. It was the spot, the same patch of disturbed earth we'd seen on Google Maps. The coordinates matched perfectly. At this point, I was torn. Part of me wanted to drop the whole thing. This wasn't just some spooky internet rabbit hole anymore. It was starting to feel real. But the other part of me, the part that wanted to know what happened to David, that part couldn't stop. I decided to reach out to someone who claimed to know David personally. Her name was Linda, and she was his cousin. She'd emailed me after my first podcast episode, saying she appreciated me bringing attention to his case. When I called her, she seemed hesitant at first. I could hear her taking deep breaths on the other end of the line, like she was trying to decide if she could trust me. Eventually, she opened up. "David was always different," she said. "Smart, obviously. But he had this curiosity that got him into trouble. He didn't know how to let things go. If he thought someone was hiding something, he'd dig until he found it." I asked if she knew what he was working on before he disappeared. She hesitated again. "He didn't tell me much, but he mentioned something about frequencies. He said there was a signal the government was trying to suppress, something they didn't want anyone to hear." "A signal?" I asked. She paused. "Yeah. He said it wasn't natural." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the signal. What kind of frequency would the government care about? And why was it tied to David's disappearance? I started scrolling through the files I'd gotten in that first zip folder, hoping I'd missed something. That's when I noticed one of the documents was titled Signal Log _9371.txt. I'd skipped over it before because it looked like gibberish, just a bunch of numbers and timestamps. But now, with Linda's words fresh in my mind, I took a closer look. The document was a series of recordings, each one labeled with a date and time. The notes beside the timestamps were chilling. August 29th, 2023, 3:14 a.m. Low frequency hum detected. Duration, 32 seconds. Source unknown. August 31st, 2023, 2:47 a.m. High-pitched tone followed by interference. Duration, 12 seconds. Possible response signal? September 3rd, 2023, 1:13 a.m. Signal detected again. Louder this time. Unnatural resonance. The last timestamp was dated the same day David went missing. I decided to play one of the recordings. I didn't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. The sound was faint at first, like a low rumble. Then it grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't static. It was mechanical, like the hum of machinery, but layered with something else. A tone, maybe? It was hard to describe. And then, for just a split second, I swear I heard something underneath it. A voice. I played it back 3 times, cranking the volume as high as it would go. It wasn't clear enough to make out words, but it was there. The next morning, I woke up to another email from Kerosene. You found the log. Good. Follow it. But remember, some graves are meant to stay buried. Attached was another file. When I opened it, I froze. It was a high-resolution version of that grainy photo Mike had found. The hole was bigger now, and this time, there was something sticking out of the dirt. I stared at the high-res photo for what felt like hours. The details were sharper now. Too sharp. The hole looked freshly dug, the dirt loose and uneven. But what got me was what was sticking out of the ground. At first, I thought it was a branch or a root, but the more I looked, the more it became clear. It was a piece of fabric. The frayed edge caught the light in the photo, like it was part of a jacket or a shirt. I couldn't explain it, but my stomach turned when I saw it. Something about the way it was sticking out, like it had been hastily buried, sent a chill down my spine. The email didn't have any text beyond the attached image. No instructions, no context, no threats. But it didn't need any. I knew exactly what it was saying. Go there. Dig it up. Now, at this point, I'd like to say I was smart enough to walk away. I'd already gotten in deeper than I ever intended. A random guy on the internet was sending me photos of what could very well be a crime scene. I had no business chasing this any further. But curiosity is a hell of a drug. And fear just makes you more desperate for answers. I called Mike, told him about the email. He didn't even try to talk me out of it. He knew me too well by now. Instead, he said, "You need to be careful. This is past the point of just a creepy podcast story." "Yeah, I know," I said. He paused. "I mean it. You're talking about going to a literal grave in the middle of the desert. If someone catches you out there, best case scenario, they think you're trespassing. Worst case, you disappear like David." I told Mike I'd think about it, but I already knew what I was going to do. That night, I booked a flight to Nevada. When I landed, the heat hit me like a brick wall. I'd been to the desert before, but it felt different this time. The air was oppressive, like it was trying to squeeze the life out of you. I rented a car, stocked up on water, and drove toward the coordinates. The closer I got, the emptier the road became. The gas stations and motels gave way to long stretches of nothingness. Just sand, rocks, and the occasional tumbleweed. It was the kind of place where you'd think twice about running out of gas. I pulled over about 2 miles from the coordinates. The last thing I wanted was to drive straight into restricted territory. The last thing anyone wanted was to end up face to face with armed guards from Area 51. I grabbed a cheap shovel I'd bought at a hardware store, threw on a backpack with supplies, and started walking. The hike was brutal. The sun was relentless, and every step kicked up a cloud of dust that clung to my skin. I kept checking my phone to make sure I was heading in the right direction. The closer I got, the more my nerves started to creep in. What if someone was watching me? What if this was a setup? But when I finally reached the coordinates, I froze. It was exactly like the photo. The dirt looked freshly disturbed, the edges of the hole uneven. But what got me was the shovel. It was still there, leaning against a nearby rock. It looked old and rusted, but the blade was clean, too clean, like it had been used recently. And then there was the fabric. It was sticking out of the ground, just like in the picture. Now that I was seeing it in person, I could tell it wasn't just a scrap of cloth. It was part of a sleeve, the cuff still intact. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my hands gripping the shovel so tight my knuckles turned white. Part of me wanted to turn around, pretend I'd never seen it. But another part of me, the part that had dragged me this far, needed to know. I started digging. The dirt was loose, but the deeper I went, the harder it got. Every time the blade of the shovel hit something solid, I'd stop, my heart pounding. But it was always just a rock or a root. I kept going, the hole getting wider and deeper. After about 20 minutes, I hit something. At first, I thought it was just another rock, but when I leaned down to brush the dirt away, my stomach dropped. It was bone. I scrambled back, my heart racing. It wasn't like in the movies, where you find a perfectly preserved skeleton. This was just a fragment, small, jagged, and yellowed with age, but there was no mistaking it. I should have stopped there. Any sane person would have stopped there, but I couldn't. I kept digging, my hands shaking. That's when I found it. The sleeve wasn't empty. Inside was an arm, or what was left of one. The skin was gray and leathery, clinging to the bone like it had been mummified. There wasn't much else, just dirt and fragments of clothing, but it was enough. Enough to know I wasn't supposed to be here. I was about to climb out of the hole when I heard it. A hum. It started low, almost imperceptible, like the sound of distant machinery. But it grew louder, deeper, until I could feel it vibrating in my chest. It was the same sound from the recording, the one David had logged before he disappeared. I froze, my eyes darting around the empty landscape. There was no one there. No cars, no planes overhead, nothing. Just me, the hole, and that sound. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the hum stopped. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I climbed out of the hole, grabbed my backpack, and ran. By the time I got back to the car, the sun was setting. I threw the shovel in the trunk, my hand still trembling. As I fumbled with the keys, I noticed something on the windshield. A note. It wasn't there when I parked. I unfolded it, my stomach sinking as I read the words scrawled in messy handwriting. Some graves aren't meant to be disturbed. I sat in the car with the note trembling in my hands, my heart racing so hard I could barely hear anything over the blood pounding in my ears. Someone had been there, someone who had watched me dig up that grave, someone who had waited until I was at my most vulnerable to make their move. I scanned the horizon, my eyes darting across the barren desert. Nothing, just endless stretches of sand and rock, painted red by the setting sun. But the feeling of being watched, it was suffocating. I crumpled the note and shoved it into my pocket. My instincts were screaming at me to drive, to get the hell out of there. But as I reached for the ignition, a thought hit me. What if someone had tampered with the car? I popped the hood and got out, the adrenaline making my hands clumsy as I checked the engine. Everything looked fine, but my gut told me something was wrong. I circled the car, scanning for anything unusual. That's when I saw it. Underneath the rear bumper was a small black device. It looked like a tracker, with a blinking red light that sent a chill down my spine. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that blinking light. The rational part of me wanted to rip it off and toss it into the desert. But another part of me, the part that had dragged me into this mess in the first place, knew it wouldn't matter. If they wanted to find me, they already could. I climbed back into the car and started driving. I didn't have a plan, just an overwhelming need to put distance between me and that grave. The hum was still echoing in my mind, vibrating in my chest like it had left some kind of residue behind. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the desert turned dark, the kind of darkness you don't get in the city. There were no streetlights, no glow from distant buildings, just an oppressive blackness pressing against the windshield. And then my radio turned on. I hadn't touched it. I was positive I hadn't touched it. But out of nowhere, the radio crackled to life, filling the car with static. I reached for the dial to turn it off, but before I could, the static shifted. At first, it was just faint clicks and pops, like an old Morse code transmission. But then I heard it. A voice. It was distorted, barely audible, but it was definitely a voice. The words were garbled, like someone speaking underwater, but I caught one phrase, repeated over and over. Do not return. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I slammed the radio off, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. But even with the radio silent, I couldn't shake the feeling that the words were still there, whispering at the edge of my mind. I didn't stop driving until I hit the nearest town, a tiny place with one gas station and a motel that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. The clerk at the front desk barely looked up as I checked in, handing me a key attached to a cracked plastic fob. The room was as grim as I expected. Stained carpet, flickering fluorescent light, the faint smell of mildew. But I didn't care. I just needed somewhere to think, to figure out what the hell I'd gotten myself into. I spread the note, the tracker, and my phone out on the bed. The note was handwritten, the ink smudged in places like whoever wrote it was in a rush. The tracker, though, that was next level. It wasn't some off-the-shelf GPS unit. It looked custom-made, with no branding or serial numbers. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was an email from Kerosene. The subject line read, "You should have left it alone." The message was short. "You're too deep now. The signal knows you." Attached was an audio file. I hesitated before opening it. Every instinct told me this was a bad idea, that whatever was in that file would only make things worse. But curiosity won out. Again, I plugged in my headphones and hit play. At first, it sounded like the recording from the signal log, a low hum, mechanical and pulsing. But as it went on, the sound shifted. The hum grew louder, deeper, until it felt like it was reverberating through my skull. And then came the voices. They were faint at first, layered under the hum, but they grew clearer. They weren't speaking English, or any language I recognized. The words were sharp, guttural, like they weren't meant to be spoken by human mouths. But there was one voice that stood out. It was deeper than the others, its tone commanding. It said my name. I ripped the headphones out and threw my phone across the bed, my chest heaving. There was no way that voice had said my name. But as much as I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, I couldn't shake the sound of it. It wasn't just saying my name. It was calling to me. I paced the room, my thoughts racing. How did Kerosene know about the grave? About the signal? About me? Was this some kind of elaborate hoax? But if it was, who had left the tracker? And why had the hum from the recording matched what I'd heard in the desert? I glanced at the tracker on the bed, its red light blinking steadily. I felt like it was mocking me, a reminder that no matter how far I ran, someone or something was following me. I decided to call Linda. She was the only person who might have answers. She picked up on the second ring, her voice groggy like I'd woken her up. "Have you been hearing anything?" I blurted out. There was a pause. "What are you talking about?" "The signal," I said. "Have you heard it? The hum? The voices?" She didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaky. "David used to talk about the signal," she said. "He said it wasn't just a sound. He said it was alive, that it could find you." My mouth went dry. "What do you mean, find you?" "He said it could track people. Once you heard it, it marked you. It wasn't just noise. It was like it could see you, follow you." That night, I barely slept. Every sound, the creak of the motel walls, the hum of the air conditioner, set my nerves on edge. At one point, I thought I heard whispers coming from the hallway, but when I opened the door, there was nothing there. The only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't ignore this anymore. I needed to find out what had happened to David, and I needed to figure out why the signal had chosen me. I woke up to a pounding headache and the sound of static. For a second, I thought I'd left the TV on, but when I opened my eyes, the room was pitch black. The clock on the bedside table wasn't glowing anymore, and the air conditioner had gone silent. The power was out. But the static, it wasn't coming from inside the room. It was outside. I stood there for a long moment, frozen, every muscle in my body screaming for me not to move. The sound was faint, barely audible over the pounding in my chest, but it was definitely there, coming from somewhere beyond the door. I grabbed the flashlight I'd packed and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, shaky from the tremor in my hands. I edged toward the door, trying not to make a sound. As I pressed my ear to the wood, the static grew louder. I thought about calling out, but something in the back of my mind screamed not to. Instead, I slowly turned the lock and cracked the door open. The hallway was empty, but there was something on the floor, just a few feet from my door. A small black device, identical to the tracker I'd found under my car. Its red light wasn't blinking anymore. It was glowing solid, pulsing faintly in the darkness, and next to it, scrawled in thick black ink on the carpet, was a single word: "Run!" I didn't think. I grabbed my bag, shoved the flashlight in my pocket, and bolted for the stairs. Every instinct told me to leave everything behind and just go. As I hit the stairwell, the static grew louder. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It felt like it was pressing against me, like the air itself was vibrating. My ears popped, and I stumbled, gripping the railing to steady myself. And then, I heard the voice again. It was clearer this time, cutting through the static like a knife. My name, drawn out and distorted, like it was being stretched over miles of wire. I turned, aiming my flashlight down the hallway I'd just come from. For a second, I thought I saw something, a shadow at the edge of the beam, too tall and too still to be human. Then the light flickered, and it was gone. By the time I reached my car, I was shaking so badly, I could barely get the key in the ignition. I floored it out of the motel parking lot, the tires kicking up gravel as I sped down the empty highway. I didn't have a destination. I just needed to be away from that place, from that sound. But no matter how far I drove, the hum didn't stop. It wasn't coming from the radio this time. It was everywhere. In the engine, in the tires, in the wind rushing past the windows. It was inside me, rattling my bones. 2 hours later, I pulled over at a rest stop. My phone had no signal, and the GPS had frozen, stuck on a blank map with a spinning loading icon. I sat there in the driver's seat, trying to catch my breath, when I noticed something on the horizon. A light. It was faint, barely visible against the night sky, but it was there. A single, pulsing light, glowing red like the tracker. I told myself not to go. Every logical part of me knew that following it was a mistake, but something about it was magnetic. It wasn't just curiosity this time. It was a pull, like the light was calling me. I started driving toward it. The road turned to dirt, the tires crunching over rocks as the car lurched forward. The light grew brighter, steady and unblinking, guiding me deeper into the desert. After what felt like an eternity, I reached it. It wasn't what I expected. In the middle of the barren wasteland was a single metal structure. It looked like a radio tower, but smaller, about 15 feet tall, with a cluster of tangled wires and rusted metal plates at its base. The red light was mounted at the top, casting an eerie glow over the sand, and beneath it was a hatch. I parked the car and stepped out, the hum growing louder with each step I took toward the tower. The closer I got, the more the air seemed to vibrate, like the sound was alive. The hatch was old and heavy, its surface corroded with rust. I hesitated before reaching for the handle, my mind screaming at me to turn back, but my hands moved on their own, gripped by the same force that had drawn me here. The hatch creaked as it opened, revealing a narrow shaft that disappeared into darkness. A metal ladder was bolted to the side, its rungs worn and uneven. I climbed down. The air inside was cold and damp, the walls lined with cables that pulse faintly with light. The hum was deafening now, echoing off the metal walls and filling my head with static. At the bottom of the shaft was a room, a circular chamber with a single console in the center. Screens flickered with distorted images, flashing too quickly to process. The same coordinates I'd been given were etched into the console surface, glowing red. And in the middle of the room, hooked up to a tangle of wires and machinery, was a chair. The chair wasn't empty. The body was slumped forward, the wires snaking into its arms and chest. The skin was gray, stretched tight over the bones, and the eyes were open. They were staring at me. And then, without warning, the screens went black. The hum stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then the voice came again, louder than ever, filling the chamber with its guttural, inhuman tone. "It sees you." I ran. I don't remember climbing the ladder or getting back to the car. All I remember is the feeling of the hum, growing louder and louder as I drove away. When I finally reached civilization, the sun was rising. My phone buzzed for the first time in hours. A single notification from an unknown number. The message was simple. "You can't outrun it." I haven't gone back to the podcast. I haven't told anyone about what I saw, not even Mike. The hum hasn't stopped. It's quieter now, but I can still hear it, faint and pulsing, like a heartbeat at the edge of my mind. Sometimes, at night, I see the red light in the distance, and every time, I wonder how long I have left before the signal finds me again. A brutal killer, known as the Bone Collector was supposedly caught last year. A dark web auction is selling bones with his signature markings. I'm not the kind of person who goes looking for trouble. I don't sneak into abandoned houses, play with the Ouija boards, or any of that stuff. But sometimes, trouble doesn't wait for you to find it. It finds you. And trust me, it's worse when it comes looking. A little background. I've always been a tech geek. I'm not some underground hacker, but I know my way around computers. Last year, I stumbled onto the deep web, not on purpose or anything. I was just curious. You always hear about it in those spooky YouTube videos and Reddit threads. Drugs, hitmen, all that crazy stuff. So I downloaded Tor, mostly out of boredom, and started exploring. At first, it was underwhelming. A lot of dead links, forums full of edgelords, and websites selling fake passports. Nothing super sinister. Then I found the Black Chamber. It wasn't flashy. Just a simple site with a black background and some eerie white text that read, "Auctions for the rare and unusual." There was a disclaimer about how they weren't responsible for any items sold, but that was it. No big red flags. It didn't even look like a dark website really, more like an eBay ripoff. I didn't plan on bidding or anything. I was just morbidly curious about what people would sell. The first few listings were what you'd expect. Some old Nazi memorabilia, weird taxidermy animals, and occult artifacts that looked like stuff you'd find at a flea market. But then I saw lot number 318, human femur, authentic markings. Now, I know how this sounds. Anyone could fake a human bone, right? But the description is what stopped me cold. Authentic human femur bone. Signature spiral carvings attributed to the bone collector. DNA certificate available for buyer upon request. If you've never heard of the bone collector, consider yourself lucky. He, or she, nobody really knows, was a serial killer active for about 5 years. They targeted random victims and carved these intricate spiral patterns into the bones after killing them. Sometimes they'd leave the bones at the scene, but other times they'd mail them to police stations or even family members. It was all over the news last year when the FBI announced they'd caught someone. They didn't release much about him, just a blurry mugshot of some scruffy guy named Henry Mathis, and a statement saying the killings had stopped. No trial, no follow-up press conferences. The case was closed. But seeing that listing, it felt wrong, like really wrong. Even if the guy was caught, this felt personal, like something I shouldn't be looking at. My gut told me to close the page, but of course, I didn't. The seller's username was Spiral Craft, which was creepy enough. They had a bunch of other listings, more bones, some labeled with initials or dates. One even claimed to be from victim number 4, which didn't make any sense because the FBI never officially numbered the victims. Against my better judgment, I clicked on the femur listing. There were 3 high-res photos. The first showed the bone on some kind of velvet cloth, with the spiral carvings clearly visible. The second was a close-up of the markings. They were so intricate, it gave me chills. The last photo was just dark, like they'd taken it in a dimly lit room. In the background, I could barely make out what looked like shelves full of bones. At this point, my hands were sweating. This had to be fake, right? Some sicko with too much time on their hands carving up animal bones. But the level of detail in the photos was unnerving. I wasn't about to buy it, obviously, but I clicked on the seller's profile out of curiosity. That's when things got weirder. Spiral Craft had a message board section, where buyers could leave reviews. Most of the comments were vague, like, excellent craftsmanship, we'll buy again. But one post stood out. Received the set. Verified markings matched case files. Perfect condition. Would love to discuss sourcing more privately. Who the hell writes that? Here's where I should have stopped. I should have shut my laptop, deleted Tor, and pretended I'd never seen any of it. But instead, I clicked on the user who left that review. Their username was just C Bishop. They didn't have any listings, but they had a link in their profile to an external site. Against every ounce of common sense, I clicked it. It was a private forum, dark background, basic layout, no logos or branding. The only thing on the homepage was a welcome message. The hunt never ends. To join, you needed an invite code. I don't know why I did it, but I bookmarked the site. I figured I'd never get access anyway. But later that night, I got a private message through the Black Chamber. It was from Spiralcraft. The message was short. I saw you browsing. If you're serious about collecting, here's a code. B1-Hunt19. Don't waste my time. I should have shut everything down. But by now, my curiosity had morphed into something darker. Obsession. This felt bigger than a stupid dark web auction. Bigger than some creep selling fake bones. I wanted to know the truth, even if it meant stepping into a nightmare. I used the code, and that's when everything spiraled out of control. The first thing I saw after entering the invite code was a plain black screen with the words, "Welcome, Hunter." No graphics, no flashy effects, just that phrase hanging there like a warning. Below it was a single button that said, "Enter." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear myself think, but I clicked it. The site wasn't huge, just a handful of tabs at the top. Home, discussions, auctions, and resources. The homepage was simple too, just a message board with a pinned post at the top, titled, "Rules of Engagement." I clicked on it. The rules weren't what I expected. No questions about sourcing, no public posting of personal details. Only serious bids. Lowballers will be banned. Respect the hunt. What the hell did respect the hunt even mean? There were no explanations, no context, just those cryptic rules. I could feel the weight of the site. This wasn't like the fake edgy stuff I'd seen elsewhere. The way people talked here, the tone of it, felt real. These weren't kids trolling for laughs. I clicked on the discussions tab next. The threads were organized by topics like acquisition, preservation, and verification. The most active thread was titled, "The Collector's Legacy." Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was a mix of speculation and admiration. People were talking about the bone collector like he was some kind of genius. One user wrote, "Mathis was a decoy. The real collector is still out there. Look at the precision on the carvings. No way some drugged-out trucker pulled that off." Another replied, "Agreed. Whoever the real artist is, they're still hunting." Mathis was sloppy. He didn't respect the process. Respect the process. That phrase sent a chill down my spine. These people weren't just discussing murders. They were treating them like art. I wanted to log off right there, but my eyes caught on one of the replies buried further down the thread. It said, "Lot number 318 proves the hunt continues. Spiralcraft wouldn't risk selling fakes. Lot 318, the femur bone I'd seen earlier." I felt sick. This wasn't just some creepy forum for murder fanboys. These people were insiders. They knew things that weren't public. It was like staring into a pit, and every second I was sinking deeper. Out of morbid curiosity, I clicked the Resources tab. Most of the links were technical. Guides on how to clean bones, preserve them, and even carve them. One file was titled Spiral Techniques 101. I didn't dare download it, but there was one link at the bottom that caught my attention. It was just called Feed. When I clicked it, the screen turned black, and for a moment, I thought my laptop had frozen. Then, a grainy video feed appeared. At first, it was hard to tell what I was looking at. The camera was shaky, like someone was holding it. It was focused on a pile of something on the ground. Bones. Dozens of them. They looked freshly cleaned, still gleaming under the harsh light. The camera panned slowly across the pile, lingering on certain pieces, skulls, ribs, femurs. Then it moved. The person holding the camera turned and walked through what looked like a warehouse. The shelves were stacked with bones, some arranged neatly, others in chaotic piles. I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't just the bones. It was the silence. No background noise, no breathing, nothing. Just the faint hum of the camera mic. Then the camera stopped. It zoomed in on a single shelf. On it was a line of bones with the same intricate spiral carvings I'd seen in the listing for lot number 318. This wasn't some seller carving up animal bones for kicks. This was real. I closed the feed and sat there, staring at my screen. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely use the trackpad. My rational brain was screaming at me to shut everything down, wipe my laptop, and forget I'd ever seen any of this. But something else, curiosity, stupidity, I don't know, kept me rooted. I clicked the Auctions tab. It was organized into categories: human, animal, miscellaneous. I didn't even want to know what counted as miscellaneous. At the top of the human section was lot number 318. The current bid was $5,000. I scrolled through the other listings: skulls, ribs, pelvises, each with descriptions referencing the bone collector's spiral markings. Some even claimed to have letters of authenticity, whatever the hell that meant. Then I noticed something chilling. One of the listings wasn't for bones. It was for a live hunt. The description read, "Join the next hunt. Experience the process firsthand. Limited slots available. Bidding starts at $10,000. My stomach churned. This wasn't just about selling bones. These people were actively participating in murder. That's when I heard it. A faint sound just outside my apartment, like footsteps, but slow and deliberate. My apartment isn't in the best area, so noises like that aren't uncommon. But this was different. The sound wasn't fading or getting louder. It was staying in one spot, right by my door. I muted my laptop and strained to listen. The footsteps stopped, replaced by a faint scraping sound. It was soft, like someone dragging metal against wood. I wanted to look through the peephole, but my legs wouldn't move. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I might pass out. The scraping continued for what felt like an eternity. Then it stopped. Silence. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed. Minutes? Hours? Eventually, I worked up the courage to look through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I opened the door just a crack, enough to peek out. There was nothing there. No sign of anyone. No marks on the door. But when I looked down, I saw it. A small package, wrapped in plain brown paper. No address, no label. Just a single word scrawled across the top, in black marker. Hunter. I didn't want to touch it. That plain brown package sitting on my welcome mat felt like a trap. Like the moment I picked it up, I'd set something into motion I couldn't undo. The word hunter, scrawled across the top in black marker, looked rushed, almost frantic, but there was no mistaking the intention. It was meant for me. For what felt like 10 minutes, I just stood there, staring at it, trying to think. Did I call the cops? But what would I even say? Hey, I was browsing a dark web murder forum, and now someone's leaving creepy packages at my door. Yeah, no, that wasn't going to fly. Finally, I grabbed a broom from the kitchen and nudged the package inside, careful not to touch it. I locked the door, triple-checked it, and sat down on the couch, staring at the thing from across the room. It wasn't big, maybe the size of a shoebox. The paper was wrinkled, as if someone had balled it up before wrapping the package, and there was no tape. It was just tied with a single piece of twine, the kind you'd use to wrap a roast. I didn't want to open it, but I also couldn't just ignore it. After about 20 minutes of arguing with myself, I grabbed a pair of scissors and carefully cut the twine. The paper fell away easily, revealing a plain cardboard box. The first thing that hit me when I opened it was the smell. It was faint but distinct, like old leather mixed with something metallic. Inside was a black piece of fabric, neatly folded. My stomach turned as I realized it wasn't just fabric. It was a hood, the kind you'd see in those grainy photos of medieval executions. On top of it was a small white envelope. I reached for the envelope, my fingers trembling. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded in half. The handwriting was jagged, almost angry, and it read, "Congratulations, Hunter. The hunt begins now. Check your email for instructions." My blood went cold. Whoever left this package knew where I lived, and now they were claiming I was part of some twisted hunt. I wanted to believe it was just some elaborate prank, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. This was real, and whoever was behind it had gone to a lot of effort to make sure I knew I couldn't back out. I threw the hood and the box into the corner of the room, like they were radioactive. My laptop was still sitting on the coffee table, the dark website open to the auctions page. I closed the browser and unplugged the laptop completely. I didn't want to risk someone tracking me, or worse, but the note had said to check my email. Against every ounce of common sense, I opened my inbox, and there it was, an email with the subject line, "Hunter Initiation." No sender, no address, just those 2 words. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the touchpad. Finally, I clicked it. The email was short, just a few sentences. "Welcome to the hunt. You have been chosen for your curiosity and potential. Your first task is to prove your commitment. Attached are coordinates. Arrive by midnight. Do not be late." Below the text was an attachment, a .txt file labeled "location." I didn't open the file right away. My first instinct was to delete the email, throw my laptop out the window, and pretend none of this had ever happened. But a sick curiosity had taken hold of me. I couldn't just walk away, not after everything I'd seen. I downloaded the file and opened it. It was a set of GPS coordinates. I copied them into Google Maps on my phone, and my stomach dropped when I saw the location. It was an abandoned industrial park, about 30 miles outside the city, a place I'd heard about, but never visited. People said it was haunted, but I was more concerned about the very real possibility of being mugged, or worse. I wanted to believe this was some kind of scare tactic, a way to mess with people who got too deep into the dark web. But the package sitting in my apartment said otherwise. Someone had gone out of their way to involve me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't show up, They'd come looking for me. By the time I decided to go, it was almost 10 p.m. I grabbed a flashlight, a pocket knife, not that it would do much good, and a hoodie, and I headed out. The drive was nerve-wracking. Every set of headlights behind me felt like someone following. Every dark turn like a trap. My GPS kept losing signal as I got closer, forcing me to stop and re-enter the coordinates every few miles. When I finally arrived, the place was even creepier than I'd imagined. The industrial park was massive, with crumbling buildings that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. Rusted fences surrounded the property, and the only light came from a single, flickering street lamp near the entrance. I parked my car a few hundred yards away and walked the rest of the way in. The air was heavy, damp, and smelled faintly of oil and decay. My footsteps echoed against the concrete as I made my way towards the coordinates. The GPS led me to a small building near the center of the park. The door was hanging off its hinges, and inside, the only light came from the moon filtering through broken windows. I stepped inside, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, and froze. There was a chair in the middle of the room, a single wooden chair, painted white, with something sitting on it. A bone. I approached cautiously, the sound of my heartbeat filling my ears. The bone was a femur, similar to the one from lot number 318, with the same intricate spiral carvings etched into its surface. But this one was different. There was a piece of paper tied to it, with twine, just like the package I'd received earlier. I untied the paper and unfolded it. The handwriting was the same as the note in the package. "Well done, Hunter. The next clue awaits. Respect the hunt." Before I could process what I was reading, a noise behind me made me freeze. It was faint, like the sound of someone dragging something heavy across the floor. I turned off my flashlight and held my breath, straining to hear. The sound was getting closer. I backed away from the chair, moving as quietly as I could, but the room was pitch black without my flashlight. My foot hit something, an empty can, and the noise echoed through the building like a gunshot. The dragging sound stopped. Silence. Then a voice, low and guttural, echoed from somewhere in the darkness. "Welcome, Hunter." The voice froze me in place. It wasn't loud or angry. It was calm, deliberate, and almost amused, like whoever spoke was savoring the moment. My mind raced, trying to pinpoint where it had come from, but the sound seemed to echo off every surface, making it impossible to tell. I should have run. Every instinct in my body was screaming to bolt back to my car, but my legs wouldn't move. I just stood there, gripping my flashlight like it was a weapon, as if that tiny beam of light could save me from whatever was out there. Then, the dragging sound started again, louder this time, closer. I flicked the flashlight back on and spun around, sweeping the beam across the room. The chair with the carved femur stood stark white in the center, but beyond that, the shadows seemed to swallow everything. My light landed on a doorway at the far end of the room. It was cracked open, and something was moving behind it. "Hunter," the voice drawled again, softer this time, but closer, like it was right in my ear. I panicked. Without thinking, I bolted toward the doorway I'd come in through, my flashlight bouncing wildly as I ran. My footsteps echoed loudly in the empty space, and I could hear the dragging noise following me, faster now, like someone was chasing me. When I burst out into the open air, I didn't stop running. My lungs burned, and the cold night air cut into my skin, but I didn't dare look back. I was halfway to my car when I saw something that made my heart drop into my stomach. There was a light on in the building ahead of me. It was faint, like the glow of an old incandescent bulb, coming from one of the upper floors of the factory to my left. I could see the shadows of movement through the broken windows. More than one person, maybe 3 or 4, pacing back and forth, like they were waiting for something. I ducked behind a pile of rusted scrap metal and killed my flashlight. My chest was heaving, and my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold onto it. I tried to steady my breathing, but it felt like the whole world was closing in around me. Who were those people? Were they part of the hunt? Were they waiting for me? I didn't have time to figure it out. The dragging sound was back, louder now, accompanied by something else. Whispering. It wasn't one voice. It was several, overlapping and indistinct, like a crowd murmuring just out of earshot. I crouched lower, my back pressed against the cold metal, and risked a glance behind me. The doorway I'd come from was still open, and for a second, I thought maybe I'd outrun whatever was chasing me. But then I saw it. A figure, tall and thin, moving slowly but deliberately through the shadows. They were dragging something behind them, a large, heavy sack that scraped against the ground with every step. The whispers grew louder as the figure stopped just outside the doorway, turning its head like it was scanning the area. I held my breath, my fingers tightened around the flashlight, even though I knew turning it on would be suicide. I was trapped. If I ran, the figure would see me. If I stayed, those people in the lit building might spot me. Then the figure stepped into the light. It was wearing a hood, the same kind of hood that had been in the package left at my door. Black fabric, with jagged holes cut for the eyes. I couldn't see the face underneath, but the way they stood, so still and deliberate, made my skin crawl. Whoever this was, they weren't in a hurry. They knew I was here, and they were enjoying the game. The whispers seemed to come from them, though their hooded head never moved. It was like the sound was leaking out of them, filling the night air with that unsettling, overlapping murmur. My pulse was hammering in my ears, and I was sure they could hear it. Then, as if on cue, they tilted their head toward the pile of scrap metal I was hiding behind. I froze. The figure dropped the sack, the whispers cutting off abruptly, leaving only the sound of the wind rustling through the broken buildings. They took a step forward, their boots crunching on the gravel. Then another. I don't know what came over me, but adrenaline took over. Before I could think, I grabbed a piece of rusted pipe lying in the dirt and hurled it as hard as I could toward the opposite side of the lot. It clanged loudly against the metal, echoing off the walls. The figure stopped. They turned their heads slowly toward the noise, then started walking in that direction, dragging the sack behind them again. The whispers returned, softer now, like they were retreating. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. As soon as their back was turned, I bolted for my car, keeping low and moving as quietly as I could. Every step felt like it took an eternity, and every crunch of gravel beneath my feet sounded deafening. I was sure they'd hear me, but they didn't turn around. When I reached the car, I threw the door open, jumped in, and slammed it shut, fumbling with the keys. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped them twice, before finally jamming them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I floored it, peeling out of the lot without looking back. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, back in the safety of the city. Even then, I couldn't stop looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following me, or that hooded figure standing by the side of the road. but the road behind me was empty. When I finally got home, I locked every door and window, shoved a chair under the doorknob, and sat on the couch with a kitchen knife in my hand, staring at the front door like it might burst open at any second. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even tell them? That I'd been lured to an abandoned factory by a dark web cult that wanted me to hunt? They'd laugh me out of the station. And then there was the package. It was still sitting in the corner of my apartment, the hood spilling out of the box like some sinister trophy. I didn't want to touch it, but I couldn't leave it there either. What if someone came back for it? What if it was bugged or had some kind of tracker in it? I grabbed a trash bag, shoved the entire box inside without touching it, and dumped it in the dumpster behind my building. It didn't feel like enough, but it was all I could do. For the next few days, I barely slept. Every noise outside my apartment made me jump, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The email from the Hunter Initiation account stayed in my inbox, unopened. I thought about deleting it, but something told me that wouldn't make a difference. Whoever these people were, they already had my information. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, another package arrived. This one wasn't left at my door. It was in my mailbox, wrapped in the same plain brown paper, but smaller this time. There was no note, no instructions, just a single object inside, a tooth. It was human, and carved with the same spiral markings. I stared at the tooth, my mind refusing to accept what I was holding. The intricate spiral carving ran deep, etched with precision, that felt almost mechanical. But the tooth itself was unmistakably human. The weight of it, in my hand, was too real to deny. My breathing grew shallow as the realization hit me. Whoever these people were, they weren't just watching me. They had access to me, my address, my routines, my life. No lock or barrier had kept them out. They could reach me whenever they wanted. I threw the tooth back into the box, sealed it in a Ziploc bag, and shoved it into my freezer. I wasn't thinking clearly, but it felt safer there, like the cold could neutralize its sinister energy. Then I sat down and tried to piece everything together. This wasn't random. It couldn't be. Somewhere along the line, I had crossed into their world, but I didn't understand why. Was it my curiosity, my decision to poke around where I didn't belong? Or was it something else, something I'd triggered without even realizing? The answer came a few hours later. It was 2:47 a.m. when my phone buzzed. I nearly jumped out of my skin, the sound cutting through the tense silence of my apartment. The message was from a blocked number, and it read, "Hunter, check your freezer. The hunt waits for no one." My blood ran cold. My eyes darted toward the kitchen, where the faint hum of the freezer suddenly felt deafening. I wanted to ignore the text, to throw my phone out the window and pretend I'd never seen it, but I couldn't. Slowly, I walked to the kitchen, every step feeling heavier than the last. I opened the freezer door and pulled out the Ziploc bag with the tooth. It looked exactly the same, but there was something else in the bag now, something I hadn't put there. A slip of paper. My hands trembled as I fished it out. The paper was damp and cold, but the message was clear. "You've been chosen. Coordinates attached. Arrive at 4 a.m. sharp. No more warnings." Below the note, in smaller text, were GPS coordinates. They were different from the first set. This time, they pointed to the edge of a dense forest, about an hour outside the city. The clock on my phone read 2:55 a.m. If I was going to make it, I'd have to leave immediately. Every rational part of me screamed to stay home, to block the doors and call the cops. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. Whoever these people were, they weren't going to stop. The only way out was through. The drive felt surreal, like I was moving in a fog. The city lights faded behind me, replaced by long stretches of dark highway and the occasional pair of headlights passing in the opposite direction. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me, but the road was empty. When I reached the forest, the GPS led me down a narrow dirt path that wound deeper into the trees. The headlights barely cut through the dense foliage, and the further I drove, the more isolated I felt. The air seemed heavier here, thicker, like the forest itself was pressing down on me. The path ended in a small clearing where a single, weathered sign stood. The paint had long since faded, but the faint outline of a word was still visible. Hallowed. I parked the car and turned off the engine, plunging everything into silence. The only sound was the faint rustling of leaves and the occasional creak of branches overhead. I checked my phone. It was 3:58 a.m. I stepped out of the car, flashlight in hand, and scanned the clearing. At first, there was nothing, just trees and shadows. But as the seconds ticked by, I noticed something glinting faintly in the distance. A lantern. It hung from a low branch about 50 yards ahead, casting a dim, flickering light over the forest floor. Beneath it was a large, flat stone, and on the stone was an object I couldn't make out from where I stood. I moved closer, each step feeling like it might be my last. The object on the stone came into focus. A bone. Another femur, carved with the same intricate spirals. But this time, there was something else. A small, handheld mirror placed beside it. The lantern light caught the mirror's surface, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement. My reflection, but wrong. The image was distorted, shifting, like it didn't belong to me. I reached out to pick it up, but a sound behind me stopped me cold. Footsteps. I spun around, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but I didn't see anyone. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just behind me. I whipped around again, but there was still no one there. Then the whispers started. It was the same overlapping murmur I'd heard at the factory, growing louder and more distinct with each passing second. This time, I could almost make out words, but they didn't make sense. Snippets of phrases, names, and numbers, all jumbled together. The air grew colder, and the light from the lantern dimmed. I backed away from the stone, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The whispers seemed to surround me, pressing in from all sides. Then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. The hooded man. He stepped into the clearing, dragging the same heavy sack I'd seen at the factory. This time, though, he wasn't alone. More figures emerged from the shadows, each wearing a hood identical to his. There were 5 of them in total, forming a circle around me. The whispers stopped. The lead figure stepped forward and dropped the sack. It hit the ground with a sickening thud, and something rolled out of it, another bone, carved with spirals. He knelt and picked it up, cradling it like it was a prized possession, before turning to face me. "You've proven yourself," he said, his voice low and steady. "The hunt is sacred, and you've been chosen to continue the legacy." I shook my head, taking a step back. "I don't want any part of this." He tilted his head, almost like he was amused. "It's not about what you want. The hunt is bigger than you, bigger than any of us. It's eternal. And now, it's yours." Before I could respond, he held the bone out to me, the spiral carvings catching the faint light of the lantern. "Take it," he said. "Respect the hunt." I didn't move. My legs felt like they were cemented to the ground. The other hooded figures began to close in, their presence oppressive, suffocating. The whispers started again, low and insistent, echoing inside my skull. "Take it," he repeated, his voice growing sharper, "or become the prey." I don't remember what happened next. Maybe it was fear, or exhaustion, or something else entirely, but my mind went blank. When I came to, I was sitting in my car, the bone in my lap. The clearing was empty, the lantern extinguished. I drove home in a daze, the weight of the bone heavy against my legs. When I finally got back to my apartment, I locked the door and stared at it for what felt like hours. The spiral seemed to shift and twist in the dim light, as if they were alive. I don't know what they did to me in that forest. I don't know if I'm safe, or if I'll ever be free of them. But one thing is clear, the hunt never ends. And now, I'm part of it.